important this is. And this demonstration is just one of dozens of activities happening inside the US, in cities all over the country, and hundreds of events that are taking place all around the world. This is a day of internationally coordinated action by those who realize that the US government is once again using the issue of weapons of mass destruction, in this case chemical weapons, as a pretext for an imperialist intervention in the Middle East. And this mobilization is extremely important right now. As you all know, last night around 9 p.m., there were large, very loud explosions heard outside of Damascus. And soon after, Trump announced that he had joined with the United States, the United Kingdom, and France to the Syrian capital. And this bombing campaign has been a long time in the making, but has not been without hesitation. Recall that in August of 2013, it appeared that the US was almost on an inevitable path of bombing Syria. The argument was made that the Assad government had, in Damascus, crossed the so-called red line, as it had been outlined by the Barack Obama administration, regarding the use of chemical weapons. And it was emphatically asserted by John Kerry, then Secretary of State, and echoed by the Washington Post, the CNN, and many others, that the Syrian government was guilty of this terrible crime against humanity. The British government had also stated that in advance that they would participate with the United States in waging a war with Syria. But because of contradictions within the war-making class, the bombing was postponed for several days. In those days, there was a groundswell of opposition to a new war in the Middle East and a new war in Syria. And this opposition came from all political sides. It came from the left and the right. It came in the form of street protests and people communicating with their elected officials, expressing that they did not want a new war in Syria, that they did not want a new war in the Middle East. And at the end of this process, the Obama administration decided not to decide about the bombing of Syria. Basically, the former president said that it was a decision that Congress must make themselves. In other words, while it first appeared that bombing was inevitable, it soon became clear that at least that war was stopped for the time being. But this postponement proved to be just a temporary one. A couple days ago, Trump was promising to rain missiles, nice, new, and smart missiles, as we all saw on Twitter, and he told Russia to get ready. And as we know, he has fulfilled this promise. But this narrative, driven recklessly by the war lobby, will lead to catastrophic consequences. This could include a possible confrontation with Russia, the other major thermonuclear weapons power in the world. China also recently stated that they would side with Russia in the event of an armed conflict. So we must make no mistake about this. This is the perfect recipe for World War III. And it is now more crucial than ever before to mobilize, to educate our communities, and to build a strong opposition movement. Today's teach-in is both an opportunity to hear speakers who have great expertise on U.S. foreign policy and the Middle East, and provides a chance for give and take and discussion. So after our speakers are done presenting, we're going to open the floor to question and answer, and we hope to have a robust discussion about war, perpetual war, and how to stop it. But we want to make sure that this isn't just an interesting or academic endeavor. We're doing this to prepare for action, and part of our discussion today must include identifying practical solutions to building an anti-war movement, building a genuine opposition, because this is more urgently needed now than ever before. So I'm going to first start by introducing Brian Becker, the national coordinator of the Answer Coalition. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. And it's how many of you are students here at GW? Okay, so a good number. That's good. And just if you don't mind shouting out, like if people could just take a minute and say who you are and why you're here. And is Rima here? She was a young Syrian woman who spoke at the demo. Maybe she'll come in a little bit. She drove 6 hours to get here after she saw the bombing last night from North Carolina. So we want to hear from her Let's just real quickly, who are you guys? Who are you? First row, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Noor.
Stand up so we can hear you.
My name's Noor, and I'm here because Emery, who just spoke, is my close friend and brought me here today. But I'm always following the anti-war movement and just keeping me updated on all the work that she does. And I'm hoping to get more involved because your ideas stand in line with mine. And I'm also somebody who's disillusioned by our democracy that we have in Costa Rica.
Thank you very much. We'll just do a sample. So, anybody else in the first row? Go ahead.
My name is Mona, and I'm Palestinian American, and I'm here because I actually didn't know this was going on. I'm at the TEDx event, but I saw the crowd, and I'm here.
All right. Okay, anybody from this, any representatives from the second row? You have to jump quickly. Third row. Okay, there's some folks here from Southern Virginia, I think.
Richmond, Virginia.
Okay, say who you are.
I'm Terry Brown.
Alejandro Brown.
And you drove up from Richmond today. That's excellent. Thank you. Next row. Okay, they're shy. Next row is Curry. I see Curry's here from Philadelphia. All right. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Jericho Jones here with my buddy Nick from Red Rose Socialists in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
All right. That's very cool. All right. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Elijah Osborne, and I'm a student here at GW, and I have a way to guarantee that war stops. So it's explained on this website if you want to come see me.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay. And anybody, we're going to go real quick here. One or two others from this side. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Don Kim. I'm also a GW student. I am still in the war. I don't want any war to happen anywhere in the world. Imperialism, and even in North Korea and South Korea, that is really important to mention. Using the word fire Korea against North Korea, that is insane. And not just Syria, we have to stand against all your support and everything.
Who's here to resist this year? Cool. Very cool. And good work this week. Let's look at that HUBC. Great, thank you. Okay, what we're going to try to do here is, hopefully, for those of us who don't know each other, today will be a day where we'll start to get to know each other. What we have to do is build together. I mean, this is about building together. And, you know, we could come from different political viewpoints on this, that, or the other thing. The main point that we have to do is say, what is it that unites us? And what unites us, certainly, at least from the point of view of the Answer Coalition, is that we have to say to the what we have to do is say to the government in this country that we're going to rebuild the anti-war movement, because let's face it, this country is addicted to war. It's really the economic system. It's not the American people who are addicted to war. In fact, if the American people had a say-so, they would say no to these wars. But they don't have a say-so. So the only way we can speak, we don't have the corporate-owned media. Let's assume that this will keep happening. We don't have the corporate-owned media. The Congress is dominated by millionaires and war hawks and people who are paid for by the military-industrial complex. We have to build this from the grassroots up. And I think it's very promising that we are clearly a cross-generational movement. We have a lot of young people here. We have people who have been in the movement for a long time. And we can do this thing, and we have to do this thing, because Trump is building a war cabinet for the purpose of war. So after we hear for just a couple speakers, and I want to ask the speakers to speak for 3 or 4 minutes, not long, we want to have everybody have a chance to be able to talk about what it is that we can do to build together. So Anne Marie, you want to start introducing? Or I know we're going to ask Anne Wright to come up first. Colonel Anne Wright. She is one of the few people, a rare breed, because Anne Wright said no to George W. Bush as a State Department official, as a U.S. diplomat, as a colonel in the U.S. military for 29 years. She resigned out of principle and said no to Bush and Cheney's war in Iraq. And a remarkable stance. And sadly, Anne Wright, there's not that many people in the U.S. government, even people who should know better, who don't do what you did. But anyway,
Is that a great requirement?
That's right. Retirement out of that government is good. Get out of the government. Yeah. Well, I was in the military for so long and a State Department official, and I apologize for all the time I was in there while the U.S. was warmongering all over the world. But now I'm with the people of peace. And and the thing to remember, those people that are in our government, whether it be in the government or the military, it's not necessarily that they are for all those policies. I mean, I worked for 8 different idiots as presidents, and every one of them had crazy policies that I personally didn't agree with every single one of them, but the whole issue, well, it may fall down, but we're not going to fall down. So don't forget those friends and relatives that you have that work in the federal government, particularly around here. How many of you all know somebody that works in the government? I mean, everybody does. Talk to them gently about the need for peace and the need to divest from the war machine. Not only Answer has organized this and is always on the front row of us challenging the empire and others. Code Pink Women for Peace that has a great divest from the war machine program that's going on right now. Veterans for Peace that has challenging the veterans to say, veterans, come out for peace. And challenging people inside the military to come out for peace. Because there are a lot of people in our government that do not agree. And in fact, in the State Department, we have now had more people resign from the State Department under the Trump administration than in I think, the last 5 administrations before that. There were only 3 of us that resigned over the Iraq War in 2003. But now there have been at least 15 people, including some ambassadors, who have resigned, and a whole raft of them who have been forced into retirement. So there are a lot of people out there that we need to bring in. I've tried to create what's called diplomats for peace. You would think that would be, that would work. Well, let me tell you, it's harder than hell to get the diplomats that have already gotten out, that are retired or resigned, to get them to come out and wear a T-shirt that says something on it. My sister, who's a right-wing Republican, says, "Don't you have any shirts that don't have writing on them?" And it's like, no, I don't. I mean, what's the purpose of a shirt unless you can put something on it to tell people what you're about? And that's what I encourage all of you all to do. As Brian said, we have a hell of a job in front of us. We really do. Those hundreds of thousands of people that were coming out in 2003, 2004, 2005 who were against the Iraq War, well, why in the world aren't they against the total destruction of the state of Syria? Why aren't they against the total destruction of the state of Yemen? Why aren't they against the killing and murder and execution of people all over the world by our U.S. government, whether it be the military or the CIA? And I'll just end on this thing of Pompeo. Pompeo becoming our new Secretary of State, which hopefully we will stop him. I mean, he a right-wing bigot, Islamophobe, homophobe, climate phobe, you name a phobe, and he is it. And that was why he was a congressperson. And then he became director of the CIA, and now he is poised to become Secretary of State, leading the old organization I was in. I can guarantee you he's going to bring in covert CIA operations directly into the State Department. So there are great reasons why we need to go to Congress on the next confirmation hearing, which will probably be next week, and raise a stink. We had a good group that was there from Code Pink that was there on Thursday that stood up with our little signs, got a lot of publicity saying the people don't want Pompeo. So please, if you are living here in Washington, watch the news, and when you see these confirmation hearings, whether it's Pompeo or it's for Gina Haspel, who will be coming up, the torture woman of the CIA, we have got to stand there. And if you ever see John Bolton out on the streets, if you ever, I don't advocate violence at all, no. But Let him know with your voice what you think about that horrible, horrible guy who is going to be creating even more chaos, whoever thought would be possible, even more chaos in the White House now. So it's up to us to stop all this stuff. Hang in there. Know that you've got friends and allies all over this country who want peace for our country and our world. Thank you. And I just need to, I'm going to have to excuse myself because we have a celebration of life for a wonderful man who passed earlier this year. His name's Robert Perry. He is an investigative reporter from the days of Iran-Contra, and he has continued his work through a group called the Consortium News, which puts out lots and lots and lots of excellent and analytical pieces. And he passed, and there's a celebration of his life over in Arlington. So a few of us are going to scoot on over to honor dear Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that wonderful speech. We should note that Colonel Enright was actually arrested 2 days ago for protesting by So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mara Verheyden-Hilliard, who is the Executive Director of the Partnership for the Civil Justice Fund. She's a leading civil rights advocate in DC and represents a lot of activists in the area. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. So there's a lot of things, obviously, that we think and that we would say about Donald Trump, and that we would say specifically about what he did and the Pentagon did and the generals did last night. We would say that he's a war criminal. We would say that that's a war crime. And you could see Mattis last night very swiftly stumbling when asked what the legal justification was for war. He wasn't sure, because to them, do they need one? Do they care? I mean, at this point in time, his presentation was that the Constitution, Article 2, allows them to pursue war. Well, that's simply the existence of the executive branch. And as my friend Kevin is saying over here, in a non-heckling voice, it is the opposite. And it is the opposite. Only Congress has the ability to make war. And we have the War Powers Resolution from 1973 in an effort to restrain Richard Nixon and future wars. And we have international law. You have the UN Charter, which says explicitly that no member state can attack, use force, violate the territorial integrity, or threaten the political independence of another state. But here's the other thing that I think it's important to recognize that we could say about Donald Trump, which is that he's simply following in the footsteps of Barack Obama, of Bill Clinton, of George Bush, of so many others. And when Clinton bombed Kosovo in 1999, he too had no authorization for that war. He too violated international law. And when Barack Obama wanted to bomb Syria in 2013 and was held back by the force of an anti-war movement, at the same time he was putting out, and his legal advisors were putting out, the exact same legal justification that Donald Trump and Mattis used last night. And when they did bomb in 2014 and began a campaign of violating the territorial integrity of a state, of a separate sovereign state of Syria without invitation to come in, Barack Obama and that administration used the exact same justification that Donald Trump and Mattis used last night. So for everyone here, this goes to the fundamental point of why we are together, why we are marching, why we are here right now, because we can't simply look to shifting presidents and think that they are going to stop this. We can't look to shifting presidents and think the U.S. will not be engaged in war crimes. Barack Obama, when he spoke for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, made the point of saying that it's critical that countries not use force in the absence of international law. And that went right out the window once he walked out the door. So last night too and this morning, what do we see from the opposition in Congress and in Senate? The Democratic opposition, the people to whom we're told we must entrust our future, we must vote because that will change everything. But when it comes to this, when it comes to violation of other countries' sovereignty, when it comes to threatening World War III, when it comes to bombing other countries, what are they saying right now? Some of them are saying that they wish that Donald Trump had asked them for the right to use force because they would like to have authorized that too. Although, of course, they didn't care so much when Barack Obama was using force without congressional authorization. But generally the complaint is that this isn't enough. That what must happen is more bombing, more aggression, that there must be an effort to take over sections of Syria, that there has to be a sustained campaign to violate a sovereign country. So for everyone in this room and everyone you know that cares about this, the most important thing that any of us can be doing is to be organizing, and organizing because the only way that there will be any change that comes will come because the weight and the force of the people are demanding it, not because anyone in Congress is going to do anything different. They want more. They are just as much a threat to peace and stability. They, the Democrats and the Republicans, jointly together are parties of a war machine. And it is only the people that stand between them and World War III. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. Next, I'd like to introduce Margaret Flowers from popularresistance.org.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry, Kevin and I are also going to bug out a little bit early so we can go to Robert Perry's memorial service. But it was really great to see so many people out there today. We are so often told that we are powerless, and I just want to share with you a little bit of kind of my thoughts on power. Sometimes it gets a little frustrating because we really wanted 10,000 people out there today. Like, why aren't people getting this? But the reality is that if we build this, it will happen. And every single person that's here in this room today is a leader because you were out there on the streets. You were organizing before this attack, and you showed up when this happened. So going forward, we need to see ourselves as leaders and recognize that this is a campaign, and sometimes actions will go, the way we want them to, and sometimes they won't, but it's our persistence and our dedication to organizing that's going to build this. Now, I think it's important to understand how the power holders are going to react, because their job is to try to maintain things the way they are. Our job is to show that they are violating the values of the people and to show that there's a positive alternative. And so they're going to do everything they can to try to keep our anti-war efforts out of the media, to marginalize us, to create threats that justify what they're doing. And as all of that happens, we have to be making our own media. We have to be telling the truth about exposing their lies, and we need to be dispelling the threats that they're going to put our ways. The more power that we have, the more they're going to try to do this. And so take that as a sign that we're succeeding when you see them trying to come up with new reasons of why they can do the things they are. But their lives are falling apart now. The international community is starting to have the courage to stand up against the United States and to organize around the United States and to not believe when we say and do the things that we do. I was glad to see the UN Security Council holding a meeting today about the attack last night on Syria. I think we have to ask, why is the United States continuing to be a member of the UN Security Council when we so blatantly violate international law, right? There are ways that we can resist in our communities every day between the day-to-day the big mobilizations that we do. And it's a difficult one, and it requires sacrifice. I have 3 children, young adult children, and the friends that they had growing up, I see many of them graduating from college and being drawn into jobs that are somehow part of the military-industrial complex. And some of them don't even recognize that they're part of the military-industrial complex until I point out that, Northrop Grumman actually, makes weapons or whatever they need. So, if we refuse to go into those industries If we refuse to support these institutions, they can't operate without people inside of them. We have to go after the war culture because it is so pervasive in our society. It's like white supremacy. People don't recognize it. They don't see it, right? And so we have to be speaking about that everywhere that we go. It appalls me. We went to a symphony somewhere in New York in the mountains, and they started out with a salute to the military. And we sat down and refused to acknowledge that, what they were doing. So, these things are so pervasive. We've got to call them out. And I think we have to start calling on the international community for help. Maybe it's time for us to be thinking about calling for sanctions or some sort of international actions against the United States, because this war machine is like on this path that it can't stop itself unless we stop it. But history tells us that if we organize and we build and we show that there's something there, more people will come to it because we are on the side of truth, and we will, if we keep building this, we will prevail. At least we'll try, right? So I hope that you'll continue to get involved. There's lots of things coming up. Women's March on the Pentagon is coming up in October. Mobilization against the military parade is coming up in November. There's lots to do before that. So many organizations. I hope Jacqueline will get a chance to talk about Black Alliance for Peace, a very important effort. The Code Pink divestment, the no foreign military bases. Lots of things for us to get involved in. So thanks so much for being here today, and let's go forward together and beat this war machine.
Thank you, Margaret. Now I'd like to introduce Kevin Zeiss, also from popularresistance.org.
I just want to leave a very brief, just a few points. I want to add on to something that Mark said in the beginning about James Mattis and the justification for it. Now, not only was last night illegal, the U.S. presence in Syria is illegal. We've not been invited by Syria. We're there to try to change the regime in Syria. Everything they're doing there is illegal. And what I want to say about Mattis was he was asked in Congress the justification for the war. He said it would be a defensive measure because we have 2,000 troops there. Think about that. We're there illegally, and it's a defensive measure because our troops that are there illegally may be attacked in response to us attacking in Syria. So that's a very circular kind of rationale, and it's obviously a unjustified war, an illegal war, and a very non-strategic attack last night. The only thing that they accomplished last night was Donald Trump was able to pound his chest. He's able to say, I told you we attacked, and we attacked. As he said, mission accomplished. Nothing has changed. Syria is still in control, gaining control of territories that the U.S. and its allies were taking. It's becoming more and more evidence that the United States has lost, and it's time for the United States to leave. I want to tell folks who are just, especially college age and young here, that these next 10 years are going to be the most important for fighting against U.S. imperialism. U.S. empire is at a critical stage. It's at a stage of being ended. People looking at U.S. empire are seeing it losing power, losing dominance, losing hegemony. And that's a dangerous time because how U.S. empire ends can have great variations. What we're seeing in response from the Pentagon, which admits that we're moving away from unitary power to a multi-power situation, in their report on that, they say, what do we need to respond to that? We need more military. We need more military spending. We need more militarism in wars. We need to keep showing our strength. That's exactly the opposite of what needs to be done. We need to recognize the end of U.S. empire, the end of U.S. militarism, and we need to start to cutting the military budget, transferring it to a civilian budget, transferring it to a budget that solves world crises, that does not create chaos around the world. And it's our job as people in the United States to make that case. How do we end U.S. empire in a sensible way? There are sensible ways. Right now, the odds are against the U.S. doing the sensible thing. The odds are we're going to see more war, and that's why this time is so important. And we're starting now to rebuild the anti-war movement that was strong during George Bush, was destroyed under Barack Obama, who talked peace but fought war. Yeah. People went home, and the anti-war movement has to restart again, and we are restarting. The action happened today. There are actions happening all over the country. In fact, it's an international day of action. but there are actions throughout the United States today, so the movement is building. We are moving toward efforts like the world beyond war, not just talking about ending this war, but ending war as an institution of foreign policy. That's the thrust. War no longer makes any sense. It doesn't work. It just creates chaos. And ending war is our goal. We are going to stand up against the spotlight of approval for U.S. militarism that Donald Trump is trying to create in his march in November. The military march, where all people are organizing now to oppose it. You should go to notrumpmilitaryparade.us, sign on and get involved. Sign up, get your organization involved. Large and small organizations can endorse it, individuals can endorse it, and start to plan to organize for that event. A month before that, Cindy Sheehan's organizing a women's march on the Pentagon. They plan to hold a vigil at the Pentagon from that march in October to the march in November, to the opposition march in November. So there's going to be a series of activities going on in October and November. And this is not only an important time for this issue, it's an important time for a movement for economic, racial, and environmental justice. There's been a movement that's been growing. We follow it every day on Popular Resistance. PopularResistance.org reports on the news of the movement, issues in the movement. And if you want to sign up for a daily digest, you get a daily report on what movements are doing, so you can see there is a movement that is growing. The other thing I want to alert you to is we are organizing a movement school that will take place online, no charge. It'll go for 8 classes, beginning in early May. And the thrust of the first school, these first 8 classes, is how movements develop, how movements grow, and how movements win, and what kind of role you can play in a movement. There's actually a social science to this. Movements are not new. Movements have succeeded in the past, and they have failed in the past. We want to help people understand what makes them succeed, what we can do ourselves to create the most successful movement, the most powerful movement that can really transform this country away from the incredible wealth divide where 3 people have the wealth, half the population, away from this oligarchy where the oligarchs get what they want in Congress and the people ignore it. We want to move toward a real democracy where people have power, not just over the government, but also over the economy. So check out the movement school, Popular Resistance.org, and please stay active now. Get the people active. As Marcus says, being here makes you a leader. You're a leader in the newly rebuilding anti-war movement. We need you not just to attend, but to tell others to attend in the future. Help build this movement, help make it a reality. We can transform the nation. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Margaret and Ken, again from PopularResistance.org. Now I'm going to bring up a couple more speakers, then we're going to break out to Q&A. So we're going to do 2 speakers at a time. I'd like to introduce Jacqueline Luqman, a longtime anti-war and human rights activist, and also Radhika Singh, a coordinator with Cancer Coalition and an attorney.
So this is actually a better gathering than I thought we would have, and that makes me really happy. I know it seems like, we're thinking like Marcus said, oh my God, why aren't more people out here? But I have to remember that when the Iraq War was about to happen, the government was about to deploy troops, boots on the ground in Iraq. And that's something that had not happened since Vietnam, a large-scale mobilization. So we're looking at a very different kind of warfare today than we were looking at, how many years ago was Iraq? 15 years ago. And I'm 50 years old, and I can remember the time when that was really the last time we were afraid that our kids were going to be sent off to war. I don't have kids then, you know what I mean? That our children were going to be shipped off to war. That's one of the reasons why we don't see the kind of mobilization against war that we did then today, because now war is, as my husband Abdus says so much more eloquently than I do, war is smart now. Wars are they're sanitized. That's why when Trump says things like they seem ignorant, like, the tweeter-in-chief says things like, we're going to throw bombs at you, new, fast, and smart. They seem ignorant, but he's using terminology that actually has some significance. I know, I don't want to be giving him more credit for intelligence than I know, but you have to remember that in the context of our nuclear arsenal, it was Barack Obama, the Nobel Prize recipient, who approved a $1 trillion modernization for our current nuclear arsenal, basically to make our nuclear weapons smart. There's no such thing. So war is sanitized for us now. We're not afraid of our kids being shipped off to a foreign country to fight hand-to-hand combat, because war is being waged by drone, it's being waged by missile. But please don't mistake that our children are still being sent off to war. We have an entire generation of children born in this country who has never known a time when we were not bombing and killing someone. And that's incredibly important in the fight for equal rights, equal justice, and racial justice in this country, even though it seems disconnected, but it's actually not. Because when you look at the amount of money, and Martin Luther King Jr. said this so eloquently in 1967, when he said that there is no way that the United States can ever address the issues of racial strife, of gun violence, of poverty, of inequality, as long as the U.S. military, the U.S. government spends the amount of money it does, and it spends more money on the military than it does on social uplift. Martin Luther King Jr. said that in 1967. How much more true is that today when we have a Department of Defense that is willing to give away its excess toys to every police department in the country? And we wonder why our police departments have an us versus them combat urban warfare mentality against the people it's supposed to protect and serve. And so they don't look at any of our lives as mattering, but certainly poor Black lives don't matter to them and poor lives don't matter. So war is connected to that struggle. War is also connected to the struggle of largely poor and Black and Latino families in urban areas who their kids want to go to college, but they don't make enough money. And the only way out, the only way they think they can send their kids to college is to get them to enlist in the military. And that's where all the military recruitment centers are, and that's where most of the ROTC units are. And that's something that Black Alliance for Peace, an organization that John Baraka, former Green Party presidential vice presidential candidate, started, and we're also a member of that organization. We're a member of a bunch of them. A lot of work to be done. So as a part of Luqman Nation, which we are here based in DC, we help our friends in Richmond, and the Virginia Defenders, Phil Waledo down in Richmond, fight against white supremacy and its effects in poor communities of displacement and gentrification in Richmond. We're here in DC fighting against the same kinds of things in Southeast DC, where our mayor, we're celebrating Emancipation Day in DC, where we're still trying to fight for statehood.
Yeah.
We're paying federal taxes, but we have no voice in Congress. We have no vote. We're fighting for statehood, but our mayor can give the basketball team millions of dollars to build a practice stadium in Southeast Washington, where we live in the poorest neighborhood of the city, but can't provide jobs, can't improve the schools. We have money for them, but we don't have money for children, for housing. We have money to throw billions of dollars in missiles at empty buildings that Israel apparently already bombed in Damascus, so there was nothing there to bomb last night. Didn't know that, did you? Yeah. We have plenty of money to feed this war machine, but we don't have money for affordable housing. We don't have money to provide free college tuition for our kids so they don't have to feel like they have to conscript themselves to our military in order to get an education and to see the world. We don't have money to pay our teachers to educate our kids. We don't have money for affordable housing. We don't have money for health care. We don't have money to adequately screen and train police officers to make sure that we're not giving people these jobs who are mentally unstable and full of bias that is almost guaranteed that they're going to kill an unarmed person in the line of duty. But we're the greatest nation in the world, according to Donald Trump. We're being made great again by a bunch of white and some black politicians agreeing in a room somewhere to sit down and bomb a brown country to hell once again so that another white politician can say, look, vote for me because I am strong on defense. So this is work that doesn't just affect the people in Syria. Yes, it does. And just as a side note, we would love for Assad to leave. I think there is a part of this discussion where people are thinking, oh, you're on the side of Assad. No, the situation in Syria is very complex. We would love for Assad to step down. ISIS made that kind of impossible. So we would hope that there would be a peaceful transition to another government, but we also know that any government that Assad and the Russian coalition approves, the United States won't. So we literally have a quagmire of the imperialist United States making in Syria once again. These are not issues that only affect a country of people we know nothing about thousands of miles away. The money that we spend to prop up the defense industry, to create the situations that precipitate us being here today, have already affected our lives in immeasurable ways in this country. And unless we stop this war machine, it will continue to do it for generations to come. So, if you think you're hot and tired today, take your vitamin and get ready. Thank y'all.
I'm going to be brief. I just want to make a couple points. I'm Radhika Singh. I'm with the Answer Coalition. I just want to make a couple points. Well, first, thank you to everyone for coming out and for being here. Obviously, it's not easy. These issues are not easy. They're not easy to discuss with our friends and family. They aren't easy to discuss with our coworkers, and there's a reason for that. We hear, I said, when we were setting up today, people were attacking us for not being humanitarian. I mean, the truth is that there has not been a humanitarian war in the lifetime of anybody in this room. That's not a thing. Humanitarian war is just not a thing. But it's not easy to debate that with people. We have to go to teachings like this. We have to get our talking points straight. We have to understand why it's not humanitarian. So I'll talk about why war is not humanitarian and why we cannot have a humanitarian war under this system, but also why nobody we ever elect under this system will ever stop the wars, that there's much more that has to be done. War is just a way to control people. It's a way to control people at home, and it's a way to control people at markets abroad. That's what war is, and that's why it's not humanitarian. No one is going in there to save people. They're going in there to destroy a government. They're going in there to destroy people. We heard from Rima earlier today, and hopefully we will again, who is Syrian and is talking about the destruction that happens when missiles are launched on the capital of a country, when missiles are launched when you're sleeping. And I said the same thing, I said the same thing in 2013, when you're sleeping and bombs and missiles are raining down on your family, that's destroying not just defense targets, that's destroying your entire infrastructure, it's destroying your people, it's dehumanizing you, it's taking away your ability to live, not just very practically with the people who died, but the people who survived cannot live any longer. Not like us, they don't have a room to go to, they don't have a CVS to go buy drinks at and come and sit here and talk. That's just not humanitarian. It isn't, there could be a chemical weapons attack. We have structures in place to determine if that happened and who is responsible for it. But it's also not the business of the United States, the United Kingdom, or France or any other government in this world to tell someone else who they should elect as their leader. That simply is just not the case. That's not our place in this world. That's not a humanitarian. We believe in self-determination, we believe in self-determination here at home, and we believe in self-determination abroad. And everybody in this world has the right to put in place the leader that they choose. Not the leader that the US chooses, not the leader that George W. Bush chose, or Barack Obama chose, or Donald Trump chose, or Hillary Clinton chose, or anybody else in this administration, or any other administration does not get to tell someone else who should be in charge. That's simply, we want to talk about our elections being influenced. So the US influences elections abroad, of course, but they do so much more. Look, this is not an election that they're trying to influence. They're trying to take someone out of power by bombs and missiles and guns and warfare. And they have the gall to sit up there and say, oh, but our elections. Okay, the Syrian people aren't even allowed to have elections. They're not even getting that chance. What right do we have to do that? So simply put, this is not a humanitarian war, okay? And killing innocent people is not a humanitarian task. But the other thing is that under this system, there never will be a humanitarian war. Because no matter who we elect, no matter who sits in the White House, that is not the single person in charge, and that is not the person who's making the decisions. The people who are making the decisions are the people who run the defense industry. They run the military and industrial complex. They're the capitalist markets, right? We have to tear down any single independent country who is opposing or nationalizing their industries, which they have every right to do because they're their industries. So we hear about it in Venezuela, and we heard about it in Iraq, and we hear about it in Iran and Syria, and the list goes on. That's the true reason for these wars. Any single country that has the gall, right, the gall or the guts to stand up to the United States and say, no, you don't get to come in here and reap profits by exploiting our people, that's who's on the axis of evil, right? That's who we have to attack. That's who the U.S. wants to attack. And it's up to us to stand up and say, no, we call you out. I mean, I guess the popularized term now is we call BS, right? And we in this room can do it, and we can do it in actions, but we have to do it at work, and we have to do it at school, and we have to do it at home, and we have to sit there, and we have to talk to people, and we have to say, no, that's BS. This is why. Just like when we do out on the streets, when someone comes up to us and says, okay, well, what about the children who died? We have to be ready to counter that and say, okay, well, what about all these people you just killed? Or, I'm sorry, I was about to get proof about whether there was a chemical weapons attack and who was responsible for it, but you preempted that. How convenient is that, right? We have to call out every single point that's made that might frame this and other issues as the good war, as the humanitarian thing to do, because that's how they won us over. Of course, we want to be humanitarian, we want to be the good people, we want to help our sisters and brothers across the country. It's not easy to stand up and say, this is not the way, but that's the way we have to. And sometimes it feels hard. It feels hard when we come here. I mean, this is the 5th time we are out in just as many years protesting war on Syria. But we have to keep doing it, and we have to keep bringing people out. We have to say, no matter what you say, you are not going to win. You can say the same thing over and over, or someone else can say it, but our numbers will grow, and the only way they grow is by bringing everybody else along, not just ourselves knowing it and standing up and being willing to say something, which I agree is not an easy thing to do. But we have to bring others out. We have to show them. I don't know if I wasn't here in the beginning of the teaching, but I can tell you in 2013 we were out on the White House sidewalk, and there was supposed to be a press conference, and Obama was going to announce a strike on Syria, and all the press could hear in the Rose Garden was us chanting, no war on Syria, and they started tweeting that all they could hear was no war on Syria, and we stood there, and we shouted them down, and there was no announcement of war on Syria. There was backtracking. So we can make a difference. We can make a difference, and we have to know that, and we have to stand up and do it.
Thank you, Ryan and Jacqueline. Those great speeches. Before we introduce our last two speakers, I'm going to quickly pass around a donation box and ask that if you consider any donations, please to do so. We don't accept any core donations. Obviously, we're all funded by supporters, and we need money for things like signs, this banner here, paint, supplies, stuff like that. So if you could, please. So our last speaker is going to be Rena, who is a Syrian student from, I believe, North Carolina, and she drove 6 hours to be here today to protest intervention in Syria. And last week, Sean Blackman, an organizer with Stop Police Terror Project DC, and a member of the Party of Socialism.
And Phil Vallejo, who just arrived.
And Phil Vallejo, who just arrived as well. So, okay, 3 more speakers, and then we're going to open up Q&A. So, thank you.
So I'm Rima. I've never really done this type of thing before today, so I'm kind of still new to all this. But so I'm a Syrian American, first generation. My parents were born in Aleppo, Syria. When my dad was 18, he made the smart decision to move to the United States so he could go to college, do the whole American dream thing, and plus he just hated the regime in Syria. Something I can say about myself is that I grew up with two halves to who I am. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a predominantly white neighborhood. I was raised around American friends, in an all-white school, basically. If you looked at me, you would see I'm kind of brown, right? But the way my parents raised me is they surrounded me with white people, so I kind of had an identity crisis. But I figured it out, of course, right? Still kind of doing that thing. And something I struggled with, especially in high school, is how I perceived the world was not how my classmates saw it. I saw myself in Mint Hill, North Carolina, with the people I loved, my classmates, my teachers, my community. I volunteered, I did all these things that I loved. I adored it. And then I also loved every part of Syria, every part of every person there, even though I'd never been there. And something I've struggled with is that my classmates couldn't see the things the way I saw them. They see things on the news. I remember watching Iraq every day on the news, and no one around me could relate to it. And I think that's a big issue in today's society, and our youth specifically. We separate ourselves from people from other parts of the world so we don't feel their pain. We desensitize ourselves. We just make them something other than human. And that's a big issue, because how can you want to help others if you don't feel their pain? If you can't relate to them, you know? And I related to everything in Syria because my whole family was in Syria except my brothers and sisters and my mom and dad. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins. Even one of my sisters, she lived in Syria, one of my half-sisters, and had a baby there and got married there. And when the crisis first started, I didn't know how to deal with knowing that my uncle, he was the first person, like it's so vivid in my mind. My mom is telling me that her sister's husband, he was getting groceries at the market, and there was crossfire between the rebels and the Syrian government, he was shot. But the government was ashamed, so they wouldn't release the body for 3 weeks. He was lying in the street, rotting. And if you know anything about Arab culture, Muslim culture, he couldn't be washed and he couldn't be put into the ground the way he came into the world, you know? And I was just shattered. I never met this man. I didn't even know his first name. I just knew he was my blood and he was another person. And that my cousins, one was 10 years old and one was 20 years old, they couldn't even see their father, you know? And it's seeing that. Like, I'm going to school, one of my friends is sitting in a restaurant, she says her quesadilla is too cheesy and doesn't even take a bite of it, lets it go throw away, and my uncle is lying in the street, his body's rotting. You know, but nobody else knew this, you know, because the media doesn't show it. My classmates, I'm sitting in Spanish and there's a fight going on. A kid gets his head slammed into a desk, blacks out, and they have to take him to the hospital. I'm crying because my classmates are saying, I wish I saw it. I wish I was there. And they're laughing. How can we allow that to happen within our own school systems? How are these children, the ones that are supporting fights within their own classrooms, how are they going to stand up and fight against a war machine? How are they going to fight for people that are being murdered all across the world? It's not just what's going on in the Middle East. It's in Africa. It's in Burma. there's a huge crisis in Burma right now. Do you see that around? Do our students know about it? It's when you're not exposing children to this, you don't need to show them the violence. You just need to show them that everyone across the world is human too. And that's something that not a lot of people see. And all the speakers I've listened to, you guys brought up all amazing points, so many important points about the war machine, the facts, all this stuff. But something I try to speak on is how we perceive each other as humans. I identify as a humanitarian because I see everyone as a human being, because we all feel love, we all feel pain. These are traits of who we are as human beings. It's what makes us human. And I'm kind of at a loss for words just because.
Thank you very much.
How y'all doing this afternoon? I'm Luqman from Southeast Syria Project DC, also a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Won't be long this afternoon. We've had so many great presentations. I'm going to try not to repeat too many of the points that have already been made, but some of you heard me mention at the rally earlier about how Martin Luther King connected racism, economic exploitation, and war. And I wanted to dig into that just a little bit more based on some words ahead. So I'm going to quote him briefly here. When talking about the Vietnam War, King said, quote, "It has played havoc with our domestic destinies. This day we are spending $500,000 to kill every Viet Cong soldier. Every time we kill one, we spend about $500,000 while we spend only $53 a year for every person characterized as poverty-stricken in the so-called poverty program, which is not even a good skirmish against poverty." He goes on to say, not only that, it has put us in a position of appearing to the world as an arrogant nation. And here we are 10,000 miles away from home, fighting for the so-called freedom of the Vietnamese people, when we have not even put our own house in order. And we force young black men and young white men to fight and kill in brutal solidarity. Yet when they come back home, they can't hardly live on the same block together. And so what we've heard here from King is precisely the reason why, towards the end of his life, we started to see sort of a real shift in his politics. When he understood that connection, that's why he said we have to begin to question the capitalistic economy. Those are his words. He said we have to begin to question the capitalistic economy. When you have a system like capitalism that not only operates, but really it subsists on exploitation, it cannot function without it. And anything that stops the production of capital and the overproduction of profit, if you will, anything that stands against that in the interest of that must be struck down with extreme prejudice. And so what we're seeing in Syria, I feel, is just part and parcel of that. And when he talks about America being seen as an arrogant nation, today we would call that American exceptionalism, right? This inability to engage in self-reflection and self-criticism is what leads to this kind of arrogance that King was talking about. And that's why America feels it can take it upon itself to go and supposedly spread democracy in places of the world. We ain't got it right here. I mean, even some of the most basic civil rights are still having to be fought for in the most pronounced struggles here, even in the 21st century. America calls itself the land of the free, but 25% of folks who are incarcerated on this earth are incarcerated right here in this country, even though this country only makes up 5% of the global population. So you see the contradictions of capitalism, the interplay that it has with white supremacy as a nation that was founded by slavery and genocide. This is how we lead up to a point we're at today. And this is why when we talk about that arrogance and this skewed national consciousness, if you will, America hasn't even really grappled with that part of its history. It upholds slave owners and warmongers and rapists and frankly pedophiles as their so-called founding fathers and national heroes. You see what I mean? And then they expect you and I to take part in this vulgar kind of patriotism and to think that we should go with the whims of the state simply because we're American. Well, I don't know about you, but I was born in this country. I didn't ask to come here, but I don't consider myself an American first and foremost. That is not chiefly how I identify. I identify first and foremost as a person of conscience. And I believe that that is the same reason that you all are here today, because you feel similarly. And that is why we do not feel comfortable, do not feel it's appropriate that these kinds of conflicts continue to be carried out in our name, and this blood is shed by our tax dollars, the same tax dollars that go to feed, house, and clothe, and give so many other resources to the folks that need it right here in this country. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sean. I just want to quickly shout out the fact that Sean is a co-host of a really great radio show on Sputnik Radio called By Any Means Necessary. It's all available online for free, so you can check it out. And our last speaker is going to be Phil Villado, same group from the Virginia Defenders, which is the same group as Jacqueline Luqman. So please give a welcome to you.
Hi, apologize for being late. I did make it to the march and dropped off Terry and Ollie to join Jackie and Ollie, and then I spent the rest of the time looking for a parking place. So I think we have a better chance of finding a just peace in the Middle East than driving up from Richmond to D.C. Saturday morning, and I salute the young sister from Charlotte. I don't know how you did it, but you beat us. I wanted to talk about a subject that there's a great deal of confusion about in this country. It would take a long time to get into it in the kind of detail it deserves. But just to touch on some of the points, because it's a source of a great deal of confusion and it's used as ammunition against us. And that's the role of Russia in Ukraine. We were coming up on the trip on the way up here, and we had a conversation about it, so that was my sort of preparation. But we're told that Russia it has designs on Ukraine, that it invaded Crimea, it took over Crimea, it's backing an insurgency in the area called Donbass, and that the people are resisting it, and the United States is has been sending support and upgraded it under Trump administration recently to lethal weapons. The United States conducts military exercises twice a year with the Ukrainian Army and Navy. They carry out exercises in the Black Sea, which is between Ukraine and Russia. They're building a military base, an army base, that they will turn over to the Ukrainian government, which will in effect be a NATO base. Ukraine is not part of NATO, but it functions as if it were. And it eventually probably will be brought into NATO. It has a 1,200-mile land border with Russia. And Russia is looking out at a ring of NATO countries that surround it. And you would think that because of this, that people would say, well, gee, Russia's kind of on the defensive here, and NATO and the U.S. are the aggressors. Yeah. But no, we're told that the U.S. is just helping support for Ukraine against the aggression of Russia. So I just wanted to just touch on a couple of things that really help to shine a little light on it. In 2014, there was a president of Ukraine who was pushing for a trade deal with Russia, and the parliament was pushing for a trade deal with the European Union. And each one was sort of making their own calculations of which would be better both for the country and for themselves personally and for their rich friends and so on. The president was corrupt, as are most of the politicians in Ukraine, and I mentioned several other places. But at any rate, we're focusing on Ukraine today. So there were street protests, and they were kind of interesting street protests. They sort of mirrored leftist protests, but they were more mechanical. as if they were following sort of a choreographed plan. And they got larger and larger, and then they became violent, and then paramilitary organizations showed up in full battle gear and began to play a role in the demonstrations. And then some people got shot, and we were told that it was the federal government that was shooting the protesters, but there's been a great deal of information that comes out that it may actually have been paramilitary organizations shooting on the protesters, but then placing the blame on the government. At any rate, the president was overthrown, and a new president was placed in, and then there's a second one in now named Petro Poroshenko. That revolution, if you want to call it that, is known as Maidan, because the big square, the Euromaidan square in front of the government buildings is called Euromaidan, and the protest was called Maidan. And one of the first things the new government came in and did was to ban the use of the Russian language as an official language of the country, which it had been. Ukraine is about 17% of Russian, ethnic Russian overall, but in the Crimea area, it's well over 90%. And Crimea is a country that was part of Russia until 1954, when it was administratively transferred to, I see a lot of nod heads. I could go home now if you want.
Keep going.
If I leave now, I might make it. Okay, all right. No, I'm glad. The word is getting out. And so the people of Crimea said, wait a minute, we were part of Russia, and then we relate to Russia, and they transferred us over to Ukraine. And now,
Khrushchev, right? Khrushchev is from the Ukraine.
Well, he's actually from, I thought that too, but I've been corrected, he's from a border town.
Okay.
So the Ukrainians progressive Ukrainians don't really want to claim them. But it was on the line.
But he's the one who did it, right?
Yes, it was Christian. And so the people of Crimea organized a referendum. And they said, if you're not going to let us speak our language, and you're going to be dogging us, and you work with fascists and Nazis, and those are people who fought against in World War II, to heck with it. Let's go back to Russia. So they had a referendum, and it was a referendum, and they did decide to go back to Russia, and Russia came in, and with the local folks took over the military institutions. That was the invasion of Crimea, which was interesting for one particular reason: no one died. There were no deaths in this Russian invasion. Meanwhile, the folks up in Donbass, which is a region, a hilly industrial region that's very close to Russia, they also are largely ethnic Russian, and they also didn't like the situation, and they started protesting against the coup that happened in February of 2014, and there was repression against them, and it developed into civil war, and people in the cities of Odessa and Donetsk and somebody help me. No. In Donbass, there's a $500 reward for the person who gets it. Busan, I get it. Busan and Donetsk, and they declared the People's Republic, and there were leftists involved in the uprisings, which was not universally welcome in Moscow. But Russia did take some steps to support them. But it was not a Russian instigated attempt at separation. It was motivated by the same feelings as Crimea. And then the third area that came into public view was Odessa. And Odessa is an interesting city. It's younger than Richmond, Virginia. It was actually started by Catherine the Great in the late 1700s and created she wanted to be kind of a pearl on the Black Sea, as it's known. And the Frenchmen who she hired to create the city told everybody in Europe, come on over, we will give you free land, no taxes, you can practice any religion you want, we just need people to build a city. So they came. So this tremendous, this wonderful, cosmopolitan, libertarian, corrupt, dishonest city grew up on, it's like the Key West of, my father visited Key West one time, and he said, he was at a bar, and he said, you talk to people, but you don't have to what they do for a living in Key West. Yeah. So that's like Odessa. It's a wonderful place. It's a terrific city. And the people there did not like this coup, and they were having demonstrations, and there were people who supported the coup and had demonstrations. And they were out in the streets, and they were staying in different parts of town. They weren't doing exactly together, but they were having these conflicting demonstrations. And then one day there was a big soccer match in town. And there were soccer fans coming around all over the country, and a lot of them were what they call ultras, extreme right-wingers who are really into physical fitness and physical combat, and they come to the soccer games to fight, to get into street brawls. And they came, and that's what they call, what the progressive Ukrainians call the nationalists, the patriots, decided to have a big march. And so the anti-coup people came out, and there was a conflict. Only the numbers were greatly skewed in favor of the reactionaries, because all these people had come out of town. And they chased the leftists to a place called Kulikovo Square, which is a large city square, and there's a building there called the House of Trade Unions, 5 stories tall, Union Hall, union-owned building anyway. And people had set up sort of a tent city in front to collect petitions, names on a petition, to change the system to a federal system in which local provinces could elect their own mayors. That's what they were demanding. That was their radical demand. You know, it'd be like if Trump could appoint the governor of, appoint the governor of Virginia, and and people would be resentful of that, especially because of who we get. So the people of Odessa were petitioning, and down comes the street, comes these thousands of right-wingers, and they chased the protesters, the other side, our side, into the House of Trade Unions and set it on fire. And if you Google Odessa, May 2, 2014, you'll find just scores and scores of people's cell phone videos, and they're all the same. So there's no way that someone could have coordinated this. People are throwing Molotov cocktails at the building. People are jumping out of the 3rd and 4th floors, and the smoke is pouring out. The flames are pouring out. People are being beaten on the ground. At least 46 people died in Odessa on that day. There has never been a single person who has paid for that crime. There's never been a true international investigation. And the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality, which is part of the National Coalition, the United National Anti-War Coalition, which I'm also representing here today, and I really want to thank Answer for inviting us to speak. We're getting to have it now, inviting each other to speak different things, and that's great. And it's a necessary development that we stick together, because there's not a lot of us at this particular country. So I'm really proud to be here, and UNAC funded me to go over to Odessa on the 2nd anniversary of the memorial of the massacre, when there was a big memorial and there was some threats against the right wing. And we formed a group called the Odessa Solidarity Campaign, which you can find online. And a lot of the background to the struggle is in there. So my point was that when you hear that Russia has designs on Ukraine, that Russia is the threat, it's threatening its neighbors. Russia has a military budget 7% the size of the collective NATO budget. The military budget of Russia is 7% of that of NATO. And NATO has the rule, if you get in a fight with one NATO country, all NATO countries have to respond. And NATO has moved steadily eastward and now surrounds Russia on its western borders. They feel under tremendous pressure. They did not invade Crimea. They did not instigate the fighting in Donbass, and they don't have national designs on Ukraine. Those are some facts I hope might be helpful as we go forward and try to stand up to this Russophobia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. So now to wrap things up, we're going to have Brian Becker speak again from National Coordinator for the Answer Coalition. And I'd also just like to remind people that if you're interested in keeping updated with Answer Coalition events, so please come sign your name and email so you can say in English. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. These are extremely instructive and helpful presentations, and sadly, they're not on the corporate-owned media, certainly because if the American people actually learned even some of this, it would have a profound impact on consciousness. I'm just wondering if some of the speakers could come up front. Mara, I don't know if you could come up front, and Radhika, you're still here, but I know you're leaving. Phil is here. I want to be able to start a Q&A and have people also be able to direct some of their comments. Is Jacqueline
She's over there.
Jacqueline, come up. Mara, can you come up? And let's just take a few chair. Well, you can sit on this. We have this beautifully designed. Yeah. And or that's too far away. That's,
Way too intimidating.
yeah. Thanks. And Phil. I think that I'm glad that we had a chance, Phil, to mention Russia and Ukraine too. Part of what's going on, of course, is the so-called Russiagate hysteria, and I have a show also at Loud and Clear at Radio Sputnik, and you know we've been forced to register as a foreign agent. The show in Austin, Texas, has just been shut down. It was running daily because liberals said that the government was conducting Russian propaganda. I mean, that's the kind of silent, you know, the American people are being told that Russia's on the march. It's on the march in Ukraine. Phil helped understand why, you know, the facts about that. It's on the march in the United States. I mean, Russia's taking over the United States. I mean, it's such utter nonsense. And, you know, guess what? Donald Trump didn't become a thing because of Radio Sputnik or RT. If anybody listened to our shows, we were all anti-Donald Trump completely. But CBS made Donald Trump a thing.
Yeah.
And CNN made Donald Trump a thing. They all that free publicity. And for some reason, Hillary Clinton decided that the election was so guaranteed she didn't even have to visit Wisconsin. So she lost by 12,000 votes in Wisconsin, a state that Obama carried easily 2 times in a row. That too was blamed on Radio Sputnik and RT. I mean, even though we're not on the radio in Wisconsin. Anyway, these are important issues that we want to talk about, and they're all interconnected, as you can see, as it's playing out in the Syria conflict. So what we want to do now in the next 20 minutes or so is open the floor. If you have a question for, you know, it's a rare opportunity. We have really a lot of expertise here. Or if you want to make a comment, we want each person to kind of make it brief so we can hear as many people as possible from the room. But let's get started. Okay.
Yeah, my question.
Can you, and when you speak, can you stand up and just identify yourself as well?
Yeah, my name's Kay. I'm a student here. I'm with International Student Fund at GW and also the Party for Socialism and Liberation. My question is for both Jacqueline and Sean. Great speeches. Y'all talked about like the legacy of Dr. King and obviously his anti-racist history and the fact that racism here obviously is still alive and well, and you know we have problems with racist police. Do you see America, the United States, projecting its racism abroad in the post 9/11 era, and especially the way, you know, Americans get so tripped up and they're almost programmed to associate names like Hussein and Assad and, you know, Gaddafi with people and hyper-religious things like that? You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, and let's keep brief answers, and then I'd like to have all the panelists take a shot at that. I think that's a critically important question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love your t-shirt, by the way.
Thank you.
America has been, excuse me, America has been doing exactly what you said, which is spreading this white supremacist, imperialist notion throughout the world since it's been able to do it. When we look at the where other totalitarian regimes or straight out fascist regimes like the Nazis got some of their ideas from, those ideas came from white supremacists. Right. Those ideas came from white supremacist thinking, and a lot of that originated in the colonies, not just in the colonies here in this country, but in the British colonies, in European colonies. We can't just look at white supremacy as an ideology that just was born out of the United States. It wasn't. This was one of the places it landed, but white supremacist or racist ideas have come from almost back to the Enlightenment age, where people believed in science, but they also still believed that white was better than black. I mean, it really literally was that simple for some people who are as brilliant as Voltaire and other people who we hold in high regard. So I think we have to be careful that we're not just pointing the finger at the United States when we're talking about white supremacy and racism, but in the context of imperialism, nobody is better at spreading white supremacy than the United States. Right. I don't think. Yeah. I mean, other countries have certainly done some awful things. We can think of Belgium with King Leopold in Africa and the Congo, and the continued in Germany and Libya, but the United States through our military and now our $700 billion military and our exporting of culture and ideas, I don't think anybody has been as efficient at conveying the ideas of white supremacy to the point where you do have people in European countries not so much caring that it really is a war against poor brown people, as opposed to in order to continue to enrich a very small percentage of Europeans.
I think that question goes to one of the fundamental tools that undergirds war and militarism, which is that racism and demonization are necessary component parts of waging war. And as our friend from Syria, well, not from Syria, but he's Syrian, his parents and family are from Syria, was saying, I mean, how can it be that people in the United States, her classmates, her community members, they have no idea, they don't care, because there is extreme racism and demonization so that people in the United States and children in the United States are taught that they don't have to care about each other and they don't have to care about other cultures and they don't have to care about people anywhere else. And people are taught that those lives that are being extinguished when the US rains bombs down upon Syria, down upon the Iraqi people, on Afghanistan, over and over, Vietnam, over and over, I mean, list them one after another, those people are considered those people, and they are less human and less meaningful than God bless American people and no one else. It's the American exceptionalism when it comes to racism and demonization, and in the United States itself, when the indigenous people who were here first are considered and treated and told and murdered that they are savages, a word that was used over and over again to justify the slaughter of indigenous people. So these are routine and vicious and key and necessary components. So the way that anyone can ever succeed in fighting against war and militarism is that you have to be fighting against racism. You can't separate these issues out.
Yeah, well, the chief implication of white supremacy is that anyone that falls outside of the category of white is inferior, right? And I mean, the concept of race, as we understand it, was really only constructed as an institution for that kind of control and to be able to subjugate people and to put them in a hierarchy, if you will. And so the further you are away from whiteness, pretty much the lower you are on that totem pole, if you will. And I think that's also why we've seen such an explosion of open white supremacist violence since Donald Trump has been elected. Because even though this country is founded in racism, it has been racist its entire history, after a certain point, it became socially unacceptable to be openly racist, right? There was sort of a social consequence you had to pay for being openly racist. But now with the election of Donald Trump, the lid's been ripped off of that. And that's why we've been seeing, that's why we saw what we saw in Charlottesville and all those sorts of things. And so, like what Mara was talking about in terms of connecting the anti-racism, with anti-war. Along with that racism comes that paternalism, right? So not only do you feel that people are inferior to you, that inferiority then compels you, like, you know, in the manifest destiny type of thing, it compels you to then come in and do what's best for them because you know what's best for them and they don't, because their genetic makeup makes it impossible. You see what I mean? So again, that's why it's absolutely important to connect those issues.
Just to add one point. One of the things the Trump electoral victory did was encourage right-wing parties in other parts of the world, particularly Europe, who saw that it was possible to build a nationalist populist movement that focused on immigration in particular and actually come to power. And that has been a very bad consequence. And just like Brother mentioned, Charlottesville may not have happened if it had been for Trump, because he's legitimizing fascism, he's legitimizing racism, and I don't believe that the immediate danger in the country is fascism. I think it's more of a police state, militaristic police state. But when you have the experience of looking at 500-600 armed fascists out on the streets of a small college town, it does kind of wake you up a bit.
Yeah, and I want to ask because we have a very limited amount of time here, and I want to do this kind of quickly. What we want to do is establish, and I think this is part of what we're reiterating here. We want to set up a way to provide talking points and fact sheets so that when we're going out and arguing, trying to win over, trying to persuade people in the broad public who are getting their information from the corporate-owned media, how do we do that? How do we speak persuasively? What facts do we want to emphasize? How do we win people over, right? Because we're in a battle for ideas. And right now, the opinion molding is being conducted by the corporate-owned, capitalist-owned, military-backed media. So what I'd like to do is ask people, I want to just kind of ask, maybe take five people, say, what's the main problem that you're experiencing or that you want help with in terms of how to sort of win the argument on the issue, say, of the Syria war or generally U.S. foreign policy or Russiagate? What's the main thing that you're hearing that you're not sure about how to respond to? Anybody want to start? Yeah, go ahead. Speak up.
I think
stand and speak.
So.
And you want the mic?
I'm definitely. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. I am by no means an expert on Syria or whatever other country might be a target of U.S. imperial overreach. But I think one reason why I was afraid up until now, and I still am afraid, it's not like I'm not afraid anymore, but one reason why I've been afraid of kind of voicing out or sticking my neck out there to criticize the imperial overreach is because of the tendency to smear critics of U.S. imperialism as apologists for the governments that imperialists criticize. Mm-hmm. And one thing that occurred to me today was us being in D.C. today, and ever since the election and before the election, of course, there was this one big theme in the public discourse was privilege, the status of privilege. And one thing that occurred to me today was the nuance to criticize other governments out there from Washington, D.C. is a position of privilege. Those people that are smearing critics of imperialism as apologists, Assad's, whoever other parties might have war crimes, that is a position of overwhelming privilege. Because we're in Washington, D.C. right now, the capital of, objectively and demonstrably, the most predatory state in the world.
Okay, good. So that's one. Who's got another one about what you're... Here, go ahead. Let's see if we can hear you or if you need the mic.
I think one big obstacle that I face on with friends or families or coworkers is just a sense of pessimism, a belief that that there might be terrible things going on in the world or in our country,
but that there's nothing that can be done about them. Like that the forces, are just too powerful. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Got another one? Yeah.
One thing that I get from some of my friends, I'm older and clearly, but there are people who say that we need to strike first, otherwise it's going to be too late. You know, big forces are against us, and to protect ourselves, we have to strike first. We have to have military bases all over the world. How do you answer that?
Okay.
You know,
That's a good one.
fear has been the overwhelming topic.
Okay, that's 3. We might end with 5, so.
Well, one of the things that that I hear a lot, Jackie and I hear often a lot, are Americans who say, well, you guys are always the blame America first crowd. Russia, they drop bombs too. And nobody says anything when Russia was dropping all those bombs on Syria and when they did this and that. So you guys are just blaming America first. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a good one and a frequent one.
I guess one of the issues I'm having is that it seems like more of the neoliberal, neoconservative people out there are joining the Democratic Party, and then everything's couched in this terms of opposing Trump. So that unless to oppose Trump, you're basically supposed to be supporting these horrible neoliberal, neoconservative ideas. And people, it seems like all the people out there are so against Trump, but then they just fall into this trap of supporting these horrible, these horrible things. So
Good. Okay, that's very frequent. And then let's take one more. I think Morgan.
Okay, so one thing that I have a problem with in arguing, like how wrong it is for the U.S. to have like 700 military bases in other places around the world, take over basically whole islands, like Guam or Diego Garcia or whatever, is like, well, okay, so but what about all the money that goes into those places? And if you shut down this base, then it's going to negatively affect the people who live there. Like as if the idea that the American imperialism is an economic stimulus or something. And so it's like, well, how do you respond to people who?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, that's so much. Okay, so each of you have to give the correct answer in 30 seconds.
Oh, come on.
But let's go because that's 5 important questions. Let's. The first one was, the sticking your neck out and how it really is it's actually a point of extreme privilege. The fact that and an extreme adversity, if you want to stick your neck out and say no, actually the United States doesn't have the right to determine everybody else's destiny.
Right. I think, and Brian knows that I have a hard time answering anything in 30 seconds because we're on his show all the time. So every Friday, so I'm going to try to do this. The thing that my husband and I face most frequently when we do our show on Luqman Nation, and you can find that on YouTube, is we argue facts. That's it. A lot of what everybody has said have been people's opinions, right, on what they think is going on. But facts are what they are. You cannot like Assad all you want to, and you can argue that you don't like some of the things he's done, but you can't argue that nobody's been able to prove that he has committed chemical weapons attacks. That's the fact. So when you get away from what people feel and what people think, and even what people want, because as much as we say we would, it'd be great if Assad would just look at the suffering of his people and say, you know what, the thing for me to do is just to back away and let somebody else, if that's going to make this better. We can't even make that call. But the fact is that right now the coalition forces are fighting ISIS. It has been Syria and Russia that ran ISIS out of Syria, not the United States, and Iraq. Thank you, not right. The United States. So the idea of us striking first, or they will get us. Well, if we had not struck in the first place, they wouldn't even exist. Most of them. So I think the easy answer for me is and if you need help, you can always find us on Luqman Nation on YouTube, LuqManNation. We talk about this stuff all the time, and all we ever talk about are facts, and that's the only way you can. If you want to win an argument, that's the only way you're going to do it.
Very true. So let's do this. There's 5 questions. Why doesn't each of you take one of them? Okay. Sean, you can take your question of choice.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll do the first one, the sticking your neck out, because I mean honestly, it's a matter of being firm in your convictions. When they throw these terms at you saying, "Oh, you're an Assadist, you're pro-Assad," you'd be like, "No, man, I ain't pro-Assad. I'm anti-imperialist." Because I understand that U.S. intervention in Syria is only going to mean more death and destruction and suffering for the Syrian people. You know, you can't point to any conflict the U.S. is involved in where their involvement is bringing about some kind of result for the people there. And unfortunately, that whole question that they throw at you comes from a sort of general misunderstanding, particularly as Americans. We have this very sort of black and white notion when it comes to things like this. It's very black and white. This part is good, this part is bad. And if you're not what I personally consider good, then you must want this bad thing to happen. You know what I mean? And so you just have to be clear on what it is that your stance is, and to be, and you know, it's always a learning process. There's always more to know. But I mean, this is what you feel is right, and I mean, and you are correct. So I mean, once you're confident in the fact that you are correct, you should just be able to, you know, be strong when you put forth these points.
And Mara, your
All right,
question of choice.
I'm actually going to cheat and answer more than one question of choice, but I'm doing it super fast, so it'll be all the same.
All right, cool.
So with regard to the issue of sticking your neck out, with that argument, when people come to you and say, well, does that mean you're supporting this government, you're supporting that government? The first thing I think that's important is to actually challenge the underlying premise. The underlying premise is that the U.S. government is attacking another government because it's doing it for noble and humanitarian means. The U.S. government has never attacked another government and another sovereign state and said that they're doing it for some other reason. But of course it's for some other reason, because the U.S. is supporting what's happening in Yemen. The U.S. supports Saudi Arabia butchering regime. The U.S. is not taking action for humanitarian reasons, and so it's helpful to have some of the underlying facts so that when someone comes to you with that argument, you have to fight the argument at its premise. With regard to the question of why do you attack America first, the answer that I think is quick and simple is we live in this country, and we have a duty and an obligation to stand up inside the country within which we live and fight back and change the direction of this country. And on the issue of pessimism, which we hear all the time, people say, well, we marched and we didn't stop the Iraq War. Well, here's the thing. Look at all these different points in history. I mean, people lived under conditions that were so much worse than anything that we're talking about right now. Jim Crow, slavery inside the United States. And when people are living and suffering under those conditions, I mean, you must have felt, people had to feel that it couldn't end. I mean, the oppression of that state structure had to feel like it couldn't end until it could end, because people fought and they overturned it. So at every point in history, in American history, in world history, where people have suffered, they have stood up, and it's been the people that fought and changed. Everything can change. Nothing is fixed in place. That's the thing to always remember.
Okay, that leaves military as a stimulus, but I also want to touch on pessimism, so I'll talk to you. I remember there was a very progressive leader of the Machinist Union, Machinist Aerospace Workers Union, that represents Boeing, which is a big defense contractor. And he made a talk one day, this was years ago, and said, it's a myth that military spending is a stimulus for the economy. He said, we depend on military spending, our members do, but we know that $1 spent on the military does not produce the same number of jobs as the $1 spent on education, on healthcare, on public transportation, and so on. So some of it is helpful. If you go onto a website called National Priority Project, which has the cost of war. I think you can also reach it, costofwar.org. It will tell you how much money has been spent since 9/11 on the military in this country. And it will tell you how much by state, and it will tell you by a lot of cities. And then it will calculate what that amount of money spent by the taxpayers in Richmond, Virginia could have paid for in domestic spending. And it's really amazing. And for people who say, we work with a lot of community folks who say, look, Phil, I know you're concerned about things that happen halfway around the world, but we got war going on right here in our own neighborhood. And that's what we got to worry about. If you can, every person I've ever talked to at a welfare rights organization or a community group has always said, show us the facts. Show what the aircraft carrier could have paid for. Just real brief on it says pessimism. I don't think that's the right word. I think it's depression.
Okay.
I've been talking to young friends of mine who say they're depressed, and I said, do you think you're depressed because you have a chemical imbalance? Do you think, don't laugh, that's a medical thing, or do you think it's exacerbated by the political situation? I said, of course it is. My friends all feel like it's hopeless, that there's nothing we can do.
Right.
It was different when we were young, because I was born the year of the Chinese Revolution. And when I was 10 years old, Cuba overthrew Batista. And every year after that, it was Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Vietnam, we were on the upswing. A third of the world is in socialism.
Right.
But it's not the case today. It seems like we're going backwards all the time. And everything from the AIDS crisis to global warming to the rise of Trump. Study Marxism.
Yes.
Take your meds. Do your group therapy. Seriously, I believe medication for some situations, talk therapy, but learn why things are in the situation we are in and what is the way out. And if the way out of a burning house is down a long corridor to the door and it looks hopeless, but it's the only way out, you're going to take it. That's the hope that we have to have. We can figure out what is wrong. Please, study Marxism. You don't have to become a Marxist. Study Marxism. It'll help.
The only thing I would disagree with is I think you do have to become a Marxist to find that core.
I was trying to give him
You're being diplomatic. I want to thank the speakers, and I want to thank each of us because we came out today. And I talked to somebody earlier who said, "Jay, I thought there would be more people here today," and I was like, I didn't necessarily think there would be more people because has been so much demonization, and we've watched that video loop over and over again of children, suffocating, and it looks like, if you believe the narrative of the U.S., that the Assad government has committed this heinous crime, and that has the intended effect of making people unsure about whether they should oppose the war. But that's always the case when the war makers go to the war. They never say, guess what, everybody, we're going to go so that we can dominate the land, labor, and resources of this country. We're going to exploit the hell out of them. We're going to make them our, semi-slaves, and we're going to rip them off for our own benefit. Like, nobody will go for that. So you have to give the war a noble cause. In the case of Libya, it was to protect civilians. Resolution 1973 at the United Nations, to protect civilians, we authorized the use of force. Badly, China and Russia abstained. And so Britain, France, and the United States did to Libya what they're trying to do in Syria, but they could do it under the imprimatur of the United Nations, and thus make it legal. Russia's not abstaining now. Russia's, in fact, entered the fray against the United States. The situation is this, that if I want to go to the depression and pessimism issue too, and I want to address it as pessimism, because I think it really, you look at the world that we're up against, and you think, goodness, like the broad public is either confused or with the war makers on this. How can we succeed? or you could risk repression. Like there's some people who won't come on our radio show now because a couple people in Georgia lost their jobs because they weren't by any means necessary. They lost their employment just because they came on our alternative radio show. So people are like, no, that's the whole point of the witch hunt is you keep your distance. You protect yourself. You seek like an individual salvation. But the reason, as Mara said, we should be optimistic, not because we have rose-colored glasses on, not because we don't understand the problems that we face, but because we can see down the road, is one, we're doing the right thing. Two, people don't want war. Three, the arguments of the sort of corporate capitalist military industrial complex are based on lies. And people, once they learn the truth, they never come back. They're always going to be like, okay, I was lied to, but now I understand. And then the fourth thing is the historical reality, as this was what Mara was saying, of how change actually happens. And I'm going to end the teaching on just one historical note that all of us are familiar with, but it's very important because we don't understand context. And pessimism is about context. It's not about just whether we're right, it's like, are we right, but are we alone? Are we right, and does it seem like we're up against odds that can't be beat? That's what makes you pessimistic, even if you know you're right. When we think back to how the American apartheid system came to an end, if you really think about it, it started really in Montgomery, not started, but took that next step with the Montgomery bus boycott when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white man. Now, she had been doing that for a long time, and other activists have been doing that for a long time. That was 1955, which was in the middle of the witch hunt. The left was decimated. The Communist Party, which had been 100,000 people in 1945, by 1955, it was down to 5,000. All the leaders of the Communist Party at that time were in prison, not because they had done something illegal, but because they were Marxists. They were in prison. They were sentenced to 10 years, 8 years, long prison times. Thousands of people went into exile. It looked very pessimistic. That's my point. It looked pretty grim. So where did the movement come back? Where did it revive? Not in Berkeley, not in Washington, not in New York City, not in San Francisco, not where it was easiest and where the radical and left movement was strongest. It happened in Montgomery, Alabama, where to stand up in even the smallest way meant lynchings or death or arrest or just torment of all types. And yet once the masses of people got into it, like this time, like when Rosa Parks, when that bus boycott started, you can read this in history, it's the part of history that's not taught. After the first day of the boycott, the leader said, that was great, boycott's over, because they thought the second day it would be too much. They were surprised of success for the first day. And it was the people in the church who would come and would boycott that. They said, no, let's keep it going. And so the leaders, including Martin Luther King, who was then 27 years old, acquiesced to the sentiment of the now sort of newly energized rank and file. And he said, okay, let's go for a second day. And then after the second day, there was another meeting, and people said, okay, let's keep going. And the leader said, no, 2 days is a lot. Just think of what we've done. People said, no, let's make it a week. Montgomery, Alabama. So repressive, so hard. And that thing lasted 13 months, right? 13 months. In 13 months, and people never got on the bus. They didn't take public transportation for 13 months. They walked, they rode together. They broke the back of public segregation in Montgomery. That's what ignited the movement. When you think about the 60s, it wasn't the radical 60s, the late 60s. It started in Montgomery, where it was so hard. And so I think we have to remember that part of the history, the pessimism, which is understandable. Nonetheless, when you have even small groups of people keep taking action and action and action over and over again, steadfastly doing the right thing, at a certain point it catches on. And when it does catch on, then you have this irresistible power that comes into play. And suddenly, everybody could look back in 1965, 10 years after 55, and say, oh, we knew that was going to happen. That long unmet need for the civil rights movement and to end segregation, that was inevitable. Well, it didn't look inevitable to Rosa Parks. It looked, if anything, that she would be stopped again and defeated again and isolated again. You never know where you are in the historical continuum. But what we do know is if you don't fight, you can't win. If you don't fight, you can't attract other support. So the only way to win is to fight. The only way to win is to keep struggling. And we don't know where we are in the historical continuum. Maybe things will break in a month. Maybe they'll break in 2 months. Maybe it'll be 2 years. But the main thing is we keep doing the right thing. And if we keep doing the right thing and telling the truth and speaking to our peers everywhere, we have a historical confidence, because what we are doing is what is critically needed in this society and in the world. So that's my answer to that question, which I think is what we meant when we called this demonstration and the demonstrations around the country today. So I want to thank everyone for being part of it, and we should congratulate each other. Stop at the literature table, sign up, and become part of the organization. Thank you.